Hi, so a few days ago I visited Chicago, and on the way I got to fly over the most useless interstate in the world, which is I-180 to Hennepin, so that was nice. I flew into Midway and out of O'Hare, and of the two airports I definitely prefer the more compact layout of Midway, and will try to avoid the larger O'Hare in the future, which has overall a pretty confusing layout and is further from the city. When flying back to Denver, my plane sat in line on the taxiway for over 30 minutes because apparently there's just not enough runways available over here. They're really struggling, guys. We might need just one more. Maybe one more. I'd also like to mention how funny it is that Concourse C at Midway consists of just 3 gates. But anyway, the point of this video is not to talk about Chicago's airports. It's to talk about Chicago's trains. Though I guess those two are related.
Denver has 1 train to 1 airport, Chicago has 2 trains to 2 airports, and Tampa has 0 trains to 3 airports.
While visiting, I got around using CTA, also known as the L, and Metra, the area's commuter rail service. Coming from a city where one transit agency operates everything, it definitely was confusing to try to learn the difference between the services and fares of the multiple systems operating here. I do think the fare system could be a bit easier to understand, but this was also my first time and my introduction to the Ventra app. Connecting between the L and the commuter rail can also be difficult, as you have to walk a few blocks from the nearest CTA station to where the Metra trains pick up. It's not the longest walk, and here you can also see some pretty nice bike infrastructure. However, knowing the climate of the Great Lakes, I feel like these 3 to 4 blocks will feel a lot farther in the winter. The CTA stations are a bit neglected, but still fully functional, and Union Station has a really beautiful interior that is not too dissimilar from the Union Station in my city.
Another thing is I really do love the design of these subway entrances. They just fit that old architecture super well, and they're so detailed. Easily the nicest subway entrances in the whole country. What's cooler than the $100,000 sports cars? Bus. Look at that. CTA bus. They are actually very nice buses. Big windows. I like them.
Downtown Chicago is one of the most densely populated urban centers in the world, and is on a world-class level of transit connectivity. I feel like Chicago is often overshadowed by New York, but downtown Chicago is just as much of an urban metropolis. Trains run through the entirety of downtown, and despite the lack of a central hub, it is still pretty easy to get around the urban area. Though I do wish it was easier to get between Quincy Station, Union, and, Ogilvy. Okay. On the other hand, I also had the misfortune of visiting other parts of the Chicago metro area. And while downtown is pretty great and one of the few places in the US where you could live without a car, the outer metro has some of the most expansive car-centric suburban sprawl I've ever seen, and it's pretty ridiculous. The silver lining to this fact is that, like most American cities, Chicago has ample room for infill development. Back on the topic of trains, I took Metra from downtown to Naperville, a suburb which prior to its assimilation into the ever-expanding suburban mass, was a small town founded by this charming-looking fellow. After figuring out the complicated website and fare system, it was a pretty smooth 1-hour ride on Metra, and if I had to choose between sitting on one of these trains for an hour or driving on Illinois roads for an hour, it's pretty obvious what option I'd pick. These are super roomy and comfortable commuter trains, and when the Front Range passenger rail opens, I hope that it will run trains like these. Along the entire BNSF corridor, there are stations surrounded by pockets of walkable town centers and mixed-use development. Let's take a look at Downers Grove Station. Apartments, convenience stores, green space, a library, theater, post office, and pretty much everything you need within 1,000 feet of the station. Observe, RTD. Observe, Texas. Observe. And actually, Chicago should do some observing of their own, as many stations on Metra and CTA either have nothing around them or are located in the middle of a highway. Looking at you, Blue Line. This station accessibility is great, and for this reason I was not surprised that the BNSF is currently the Metra line with the highest ridership. However, I was surprised at how bad its frequency is. The BNSF line runs once per hour most of the day, and every 30 minutes during morning and evening weekday rush hours. This is a far lower frequency than what should exist on a busy corridor like this one. So, without further ado, here's a few ideas I have to improve the transit network of Chicago. Now, currently, the Red Line extension is the only planned CTA extension, with a projected cost of over $3 billion. I feel like there are several more worthwhile improvements that could be made that would likely cost far less and be more useful than extending the Red Line to serve one more neighborhood than it did before. First, the Metra Electric and BNSF lines should have improved frequency, running as much as every 15 minutes during peak hours. This would make it possible to use these lines like one uses the L, where the line is frequent enough that you don't need to check a schedule beforehand. Next, the Pink Line, which has the lowest ridership of any CTA line, should be replaced by a branch of the Blue Line, which is what served this corridor in the past. This video by the House of Transit goes into further depth about how to fix the L, and one of the main changes they make is this, which I agree with. This video is definitely worth watching, and I'll link it in the description. Now being just a branch of the Blue Line, this corridor can be extended further west, serving new stations at Austin-Cermak, Ridgeland-Cermak, Berwyn-Cermak, Maple, and North Riverside Park. The site of this old mall could be the site of a large transit-oriented development, preferably consisting of mixed-use mid-rise housing. Back to Metra, the underutilized Heritage Corridor line should have improved service along a new branch, running every 30 minutes between Midway Airport and Union Station. On the way, it will stop at 3 new stations: Leclerc Courts, which I believe is the site of a brand new mixed-use TOD, 36th and Kedzie serving this neighborhood here, and 35th and Archer where transfers to the Orange Line could be made. 2 other new Metra stations should open up, one at Montrose next to the Brown Line station of the same name, and another adjacent to Howard Station. Next, the Purple Line Express service, which only currently runs on weekday rush hours, should be made a full-time service, where the line will only stop at Loyola and Wilson stations between Howard and Belmont. Past this, the Purple Line will be routed with the Red Line through the State Street subway, and south of downtown the Purple will align with the Green Line, of which it will take over service on the Cottage Grove branch. A new branch could also be built just north of here, serving Hyde Park and terminating at Promontory Point near the Science Museum. A smaller change could be made in downtown, as an elevated or underground walkway between Quincy and Union Station could make transferring between the L and the regional services much easier. Denver operates the 16th Street Mall Ride bus between the different downtown rail corridors, and I think a frequent connector bus like this could also work here in Chicago. This could be a loop running counterclockwise on dedicated bus lanes. Next, on the Pink Line, which is now just a branch of the Blue Line, California Station could close here and be replaced by a new Marshall Station a block over, with a new BNSF line station here as well. This would make transferring between these two lines much easier. Now we head up north to the most peculiar line in the whole city, the Yellow Line. This corridor, which used to have more stations when it opened almost a century ago, now has no stations between Oakton, Skokie, and Howard, which I think is a waste. A station here at Evanston Dodge would really help make this line more useful. Next, the Yellow Line could be extended about 1.5 miles further north, serving 2 new stations at Church and Skokie and Westfield. Westfield Mall, similar to the North Riverside Mall on the Blue Branch, could also be redeveloped into a massive TOD serving as a new city center for the town of Skokie. I also think the Yellow Line could be turned into the northern end of the Red Line, though I have heard that there could be some issues with this, such as how the Dempster station is not large enough to accommodate 4-car trains. But it's not like there isn't room to expand. It would make it easier to get out here without having to transfer at Howard, but I don't know the full picture, so I'll leave the Yellow Line be for now. The smaller issue I have has to do with how stations are named here. So, for example, up here on the Brown Line, you have a station called Western, because it's on Western Avenue. But then I go down here, and there's a Blue Line station also called Western. And then I go further down, and there's another Blue Line station called Western. And all these stations have the same name? Maybe this is just a regional thing, but I think this is really weird, and these stations should have different names. There shouldn't be like 6 stations called Western and 5 stations called Cicero. I don't know, it might just be confusing. Maybe not, but I do think some of these stations could be renamed. Like, for example, here, This could be, say, 21st and Western, whereas this station could be renamed to I-290 and Western or Van Buren Western. Or the station could be renamed to better reflect the neighborhood that it's in, so like this Western station on the Brown Line could be Lincoln Square Western or just Lincoln Square Station. I feel like this would better reflect the actual area that the station is in and differentiate the station from all these other stations with the exact same name. It's not the biggest issue, but it is definitely strange. Southwest of Midway, the Green Line and Orange Line could be extended to a new shared end station at 66th and Cicero. Here's the other stations at 63rd and Artesian, 63rd and Kedzie, 63rd and Pulaski, and 63rd and Kirkpatrick. And finally, one of the most common problems I've heard about Chicago's rail network is that all of the lines branch out from the city, and transferring between lines requires going into the already congested downtown. The best way to solve this could be an orbital rail line connecting all of these branches, but that would be a really long line whose construction cost would likely be prohibitive. Instead, I think a BRT line would serve this niche very well. Starting at Loyola Station, this BRT will run along Devon Avenue to Western, then down Western connecting in with the Brown Line at Western, the Blue Line at Western, the Blue Line again at Western, the Blue Line a third time at Western, and then the Orange Line at Western, and after that heads further south to the Beverly neighborhood, connects with some Metra lines that I didn't bother to map, and finally meets the Red Line again at 95th and Dan Ryan Station. I feel like most of these changes would be possible for a lower price than the Red Line extension, and could really help iron out some of the retaining flaws with what is otherwise one of the country's best public transit networks. And that's all I have for today. I think Chicago has one of the best transit networks in North America that has lots of room for improvement in the way of service frequency and transfer coherence. Thank you for watching, and leave any suggestions in the comments, as I still know very little about Illinois trains and what improvements would and would not work here. Until the next video, bye.
Automatic coffee machines at Denver Airport at 4 in the morning.